Welcome to the Retaining Wit podcast. This is Josie Haynes. We're taking a quick break between seasons and wanted to share with you one of our best of episodes from when we first launched. I hope you enjoy, and we'll be back in March with new guests and content focused on empowering women to thrive in tech. Welcome to the Retaining Wit podcast. I'm Josie Haynes.
And I'm Jordanna Kwok.
This show tackles the challenges of keeping women in tech.
Each month, we invite a guest to talk to us about their experiences in the industry and to learn what it'll take to create a workplace where women will thrive.
Today on Retaining Wit, we are chatting with Darlene Rouleaux. She has spent 13 years in tech as either an engineer or engineering manager. Currently, she is a UI/UX software engineer for Schneider Electric, as well as a mom of 2 young kids. We will discuss the challenges of being a mom in tech, as well as the transition from individual contributor to manager and back.
Hi, Darlene. Nice to meet you. And to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you got started in tech?
Sure. I actually studied computer science in college, so that's what my degree is in. I think I was able to stick out the degree a lot more than other women because I had a friend who lived down the hall from me freshman year who was also studying computer science. So the two of us we became roommates throughout college, but we were also able to pair up on all of our classes. So there was always another woman in the room, always someone else I could pair with for all of those group projects you get in college, which I think really helped me. So I graduated with my computer science degree, and I decided to move across the country from New Jersey to Colorado for my first programming job. And that was really overwhelming. You come in thinking you learned a lot in college, and things are completely different once you get out into the real world. At least they were for me. It was really overwhelming, but luckily I had a really good development team, a really good mentor, and also I worked really hard to integrate with the team. They were just starting up a soccer team about 2 weeks after I started my position. So I joined the team, and that just gave me something to talk about with the other developers outside of work stuff, something else to connect on, which I think really helped me integrate better and be more open to sharing my opinion and asking technical questions as well.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to try integrating with your team. So it's great seeing you talk about that.
I completely agree, especially kind of as a minority in there. You do have to work a little bit harder you have to really step up and put yourself out there a little more to feel like a full team member sometimes, I think, which is unfortunate, but it's worthwhile if you put the work in.
Yeah. So you had mentioned to me when we were talking earlier that you're also a mom, which is great. And it's awesome to see a mom sticking it out in the tech industry. So what are some of the challenges you've had to overcome to be successful?
That's a great question. I'm a mom of a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. I think the main reason I've stuck in tech is because it's such a great career for parents, just because of the flexibility with time. So I can work from home on days that I need to run the kids all over the place, or I can work from 9 till 3 and then some hours in the evening. I really don't think that there's a better career out there for being a mom, and that's the main reason I stuck it out. But that's not to say that there aren't challenges, right? If you're working for a company that is still kind of in the old school model and you want to work from home and have that flexibility a little more, then they might not be the right company for you. And that's one of the reasons why I changed back from a company I was at to the original company I was working at, just because they were a lot more open to that flexible schedule. It took me a long time to realize that I wasn't getting promoted and recognized at my older company because I did have that flexible schedule. I was getting the same amount of work done, but it just wasn't recognized or really approved for some reason. I think also as a recovering perfectionist, it's hard to transition from, always doing your best at work to still always doing your best at work, but the best before kids is different, at least for me, than the best after kids. And I really have to prioritize my time. I have to be heads down, focused when I have the time to work versus knowing when I might be interrupted a little bit more. I think the final challenge is just all of the mental transitions you make throughout the day. And I think this goes for any working parent, in that you're in parent mode when you're home, and then you go to work, and then maybe you get a call from your son's school about something. So then you switch back to parent mode, and then you go back into work mode, and then you come home and you're suddenly thrown back into parent world. And just all those little context switches during the day are also really challenging.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm also curious, when you got back from parental leave, how did you find your time transitioning back into full-time work?
It was very, very hard. I feel like 12 weeks, which is what we get in America, is not long enough. 3-month-old babies still are so needy, particularly for their mothers. I was breastfeeding, so every 3 hours at work, I would have to schedule time on my calendar to pump. Luckily, I had an office, so I was able to close the door and close the blinds and, keep working at my desk, which was great. But, there's one time where I had my pumping sign up on the door and someone still opened the door. And it's like, what are you doing? So that was challenging. And you just miss your baby, especially at 3 months. They're just want to snuggle mom all the time. So it is very hard to leave them.
What are some resources for other moms who are in tech that they might be able to use and leverage to be more successful?
I think it's not being afraid to ask. We already feel different being women in tech, but we have to recognize that our needs are different as well. We have to really communicate with our spouses on what our personal needs are. Sometimes moms just need mom time away from everyone, and really communicating when you need that time to your spouse, and coming up with a shared plan with your spouse is really important. My husband and I, after we had our first son, I took my 3 months and then he took 2 months paternity leave and decided to take another 6 months off just to be home with our child. So I think a lot of it is working with your spouse and just always communicating, which is important in any relationship, but it's especially important when you have 2 working parents. As far as a professional life, don't be afraid to ask. If you need a more flexible schedule, let your manager know. It can be scary to ask and scary to kind of stand out from the norm. But if they are a good human being and a good manager, they will work with you to find something that works. There's lots of ways to flex your schedule to give yourself more time when you need it, or if you need to run out and pick up your children or go to events at school. Just really communicate that well with your team as well, so they know when you're in and out of the office and no one's upset when they can't reach you.
So you've transitioned from being an individual contributor to being a manager, and then back to being a software engineer. Could you tell us a little bit why you decided to first go into management and what made you go back to being an individual contributor?
I think a lot of my skill sets make me a good leader and a natural leader and a natural manager. If you follow Scrum principles, right, I am very much that servant leader, which I think works really well in software. I feel like I was really good at keeping my employees happy and satisfied by just allowing them to focus on their work, and then me focusing on all of the little things that made their work possible. As I mentioned, extremely organized, maybe a little over-organized, but I was really able to help people stay on track with the release schedules and the requirements and making sure that person A and person B were talking when what they're working on overlapped. I feel like a lot of times side conversations tend to happen in software, and the people who need to communicate aren't always communicating. I feel like I'm really good at recognizing that these people need to talk and getting them in the same room. So for me, moving into management felt pretty natural. However, I started managing probably about 2 months before I had my first child, and my responsibilities grew, and I had my second child. And it was about a year or so after that I finally realized that I couldn't manage adult people as well as little people. It was just too much emotional energy to expand. So that's really when I decided that I wanted to go back into programming and just sitting at my desk, writing code, and focusing on the more technical aspects instead of the more people aspects, so that I had energy for my little people when I got home from work.
That's a great story. And I love how you're really balancing what's really important to you in your life, because I think that's one of the challenges we really have as women is how do we balance our personal life and our success in our career?
You are absolutely right.
One of the things we had talked about earlier is that you enjoy promoting diversity. So what kind of got you into that, and what made you decide to do this?
I actually got a philosophy degree as well in college with a focus on women's studies. So it's always kind of been a passive interest, right? So when I started my first software engineering position, there was one other woman developer on the team, and she ended up leaving after she had her child. So then it was just me programming as the only woman for a while. And then another woman got hired, so it was the two of us. And it's probably about 2 out of 20 developers, so ratio is pretty low, 10% there. And then I left, so she was the only woman on the team now working as a developer. And then when I came back, I was still the only woman developer on the team. And I realized that nothing was going to change unless I tried to change it. So part of it is me just being fed up with being the only woman on the team and wanting to see change. Obviously, my company has diversity initiatives and all of that, but there was no one really pushing it locally in our office. We didn't have an International Women's Day event in 2018. So me and another woman decided that we needed to change this. She had gotten some feedback on her annual review where really the criticism was not things she was doing wrong, but it was things she was doing different, right? It was all around her communication patterns, which are different than a man traditionally, and those communication patterns being undervalued. So we set out to meet with other women across the company because there are women QA and product managers, etc. So we invited all the women at our office to meet once a month and to start to talk through these issues so that everyone knew that these issues were shared, right? That they aren't unique in experiencing some of these prejudices and unconscious bias. So we did that throughout 2018. And then I presented to the entire company in November 2018 on what we had been meeting on and what we had been learning. And out of that, we spun out a small group to promote diversity throughout the year with some actual budget from the company to put on some events. So we put on an International Women's Day event. We did a Holi celebration, which is an Indian Hindu celebration. We did a Pride event. So really, we're just starting to grow it. I'm excited to see next year if more people get involved and have their own little diversity tangents that they want us to celebrate. It really came out of me wanting change, though.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing the work you've been doing to promote inclusion and diversity at your workplace. Something we like to ask our guests as we wrap up is if there is a key takeaway you would like to share with our listeners on how to keep women in tech.
I think individually, women themselves do need to put in the work to integrate within their team. It's hard because there is the feeling that you don't belong sometimes, and you just need to step up and be brave and put yourself out there a little more so that you can start to feel more like a full team member. I think it's also recognizing that if your company or your team is not supporting you in who you are, that there are other companies out there who will. So just if you have a bad experience at one company, it doesn't mean that all of tech is like that. We need more women in tech just to get their opinions in there, to develop for women, to solve problems in the real world that are more women specific. And what can men do to include more women? Because that's a big piece of this puzzle. We aren't going to get more women in tech and increase diversity unless we have buy-in from the 80% that's part of the tech industry, the 80% being, mostly the men in the room. The 20% can't change it without buy-in from that 80%. They need to get educated on unconscious bias and begin to check their unconscious bias. They need to recognize how the little things they do during the day might be affecting the women they work with and start to check that. We need to, it's really hard, but start to call people out on it. So how do you call someone out on unconscious bias? There's a lot of different ways to do it. What works for me is after something happens, say, hey, do you want to take a walk? I have something I want to talk to you about. A lot of times calling someone out in that instance, they won't take it right. They'll take it as criticism, where really it should be coming from a place of education. Because I don't think the majority of people go out there and say, I want to discriminate against you. I think they don't even realize what they're doing. So look at it from an educational perspective.
Yeah, those are some great points. And I think it's super important when communicating feedback to somebody to definitely take them aside and come at it from a point where, hey, everybody's a rational human being who wants to, create a good workplace. And maybe they hadn't thought about the bias.
Yeah, exactly.
So in case our audience would like to reach out to you, how should they do that?
So my Instagram and Twitter handle is mommingintech. And I also have a blog, mommingintech.com, where I discuss a lot of these issues that I've encountered and life as a woman in tech and life as a mom and how my husband and I balance everything and work to be a team on all of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time to talk to us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to share with you.
Thanks for listening to the Retaining Wit podcast. You can keep up with our latest episodes at retainingwit.com, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast shows.